Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera everyone. Thank you for joining us for this special episode of Cuba Cerita, where we are going to reflect on leadership lessons that we learned from the first 5 guests on our show. First of all, we started, remember, with Datuk Rizza Abdoh. We then had Azran Osman Rani. Our third guest was Harith Iskandar. Then we followed by Dr. Shahridan Faiz. And finally, last week, we had Professor Tan Sri Dr. Sahul Hamid. Now, each and every one of them have their own leadership experiences that they shared, and leadership is a big word. So what we're going to do is that we're going to focus on 3 areas of leadership traits that are important. The first one is inspiring others. The second is dealing with trouble and making complex decisions when information is limited. And the third area of leadership traits is empathy. How do you deal with people, especially your team, as a leader? The first leadership trait that we're going to examine is inspiring others. How does a leader inspire the people that are following him? How does a leader translate what he sees in his mind in terms of a vision into a clear-cut message so that others can understand what he sees? And the best way a leader can do this is by telling stories, giving analogies, allowing the expression of what he sees into a simple language that his followers and his team can actually learn from and understand succinctly and with a lot of clarity. Datuk Rizza Abdoh, our very first guest on Cuba Cerita, was very vivid in terms of how he described his childhood in his early days. He was even able to encapsulate his experiences when he came from a very poor family. And he told a story about how he went to ITK not to just study, but also find a means of being able to have 3 meals a day.
And we don't have any income. I believe it's only 150 ringgit a month my sister sent to my mother.
MashaAllah.
So because of that, I think for 4 years I went to school without a single cent in my pocket.
Really?
So I never know the canteen also, even until today. I didn't know where the canteen is. So that was a time when I would say taught me a lot of things that, I went through what I call urban poverty.
A further example of Datuk Rizza was when he described very compellingly when he was with the PM's department in ICU, where one day he took it upon himself to actually climb into the audio visual recording room just to observe the Prime Minister working with his cabinet on special initiatives that the government. And from there, he learnt how does the leader of the country man the ship from the helm. Just by listening to his story, we ourselves are inspired by how he was able to learn and experience so that one day he too was able to adopt the same type of measures for himself.
One day I decided to sneak into the recording room of the cabinet meeting. So we have a recording room, so I get close to the people who are in charge of the room. So I requested for them to allow me to go in, so they allow me to go in. But of course, it's supposed to be confidential. It's not supposed to be, Then when I saw the meeting myself, chaired by Dr. Mahathir, the Prime Minister then he was implementing a lot of things like Perwaja, Proton Saga, and things like that. I think it was a very courageous kind of policy.
Azran Osman Rani pula, he is a type of leader who relies on data and facts to back up his stories. And I believe that's something that he had to learn as he progressed in his career. Even when he was describing his upbringing, he realized that physically he was small, and he linked it towards a scientific fact perhaps, that children who are born in the earlier part of the year tend to be physically more in an advantage compared to children who are born in the latter parts of the year.
if you've ever read the book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers,
Okay.
you know, where he talks about 10,000 hours, right? He also had a story about the Canadian ice hockey team, which had disproportionately higher percentage of people born in January to March. Now, the reason for that is because you start the sport very early, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. And that point, when you are January to March, you tend to be physically bigger than the kids born at the end of the year, right?
Okay.
And because you're physically bigger, you get selected more, and then you kind of progress faster into the all the different categories of competition.
Okay.
Now, I'm the opposite. I was born in December.
You were born in
And not only
December.
was I born in December, I was born as a bit of a small kid.
Oh.
And as a result, growing up, you know how those days when we grew up, you, as a boy, you wanted to see whether you can play football or soccer with the boys. And I never got selected because I wasn't big enough, I wasn't strong enough, right?
All right.
So I ended up learning very early on how to make my own games,
Oh.
how to convince the younger kids to join me in my crazy pursuit of games, right?
And this is just like playing as a child.
You know, at the playground, right? At the
Okay.
taman.
Okay.
Um,
Harith Iskandar, he's a stand-up comedian, a professional, and obviously is brilliant at telling stories. But that too, you can visualize what Harith was seeing through his own eyes as and when he was experiencing. Not so much about how he related the stories from the factual detail, but how he injects humor into his stories. For example, when he was on the set of Anna and the King, when he related the story about being in the trailer, and as he peered outside on his very first day to look around and see, you yourself could feel being in that presence, as if you yourself were experiencing exactly what he was experiencing at the time.
But I'll spend 2 minutes telling you how amazing it was. Kita local production.
Okay.
So shooting in Ipoh for 3 months. I arrived at the hotel, which is a newly built heritage hotel in Ipoh, brand new. I arrived there, shooting next morning, arrived. You get your key. So local production, you shoot hotel, you stay with 3, 4, 5, 12 other people in your room lah, local lah. So I was like, who am I sharing with? And no, the room is for yourself.
Chey.
Entire 3 months. Oh, steady. Okay, call sheet comes in. Okay, 6 a.m., meet at the lobby, take you to the location. So I come down and then the other 2 bodyguards are there.
Okay.
Hey, bro, excited. And then waiting for the transport. And then 3 hotel limo Mercedes. Each of us has 1 hotel limo to take us to the location.
Chey.
And kita pun macam, are we going to the same place? Because in Hollywood, if you have a line in a movie, you are considered A or class or something. And then it comes with, you must have your own transport, you must have your own makeup artist. And we arrive at the set and there's these trailers, you know, the trailer with the shower and the... And there's a trailer with my name on it. Like I'm getting a trailer.
Seriously?
Oh, alamak.
Wow.
And then the 3rd assistant director will come in. Okay, hurry, stand by here. You know, don't go anywhere. First day aku don't go anywhere. Aku buka pintu tengok. Don't go anywhere.
It's like Jodie Foster.
No, waiting like excited. Then the 3rd assistant director, hurry, we need you on set. And my limo is waiting to take me to the set. So I get into the car, duduk, about 20 meters. Okay, sini. Then I'm like, bang, nanti balik aku jalan ni. Tak payah bawa, aku boleh jalan.
Dr. Shahidan Faiz, he is equally skilled at telling stories. For someone, imagine, who started his career studying geology and then became more of a social development expert, from his stories about how he has been engaging with communities. Most importantly, recently he talked about how he's been engaging with the people under the Project Perumahan Rakyat and describing the experiences of these people. Again, it's through stories. How he vividly described even the man who had to bring his motorcycle into the lift just because he was so afraid of his motorcycle being stolen. Again, compelling, inspiring storytelling as a leader?
So my parents are also quite interesting because in a way they are part of the Penang story,
Oh.
and they are part of, you could say, a colonial history lah.
Oh.
Yeah. My father, at a very young age of 10, was put onto a ship in the port of Nagapatnam in South India,
Uh-huh.
and shipped to Penang.
And shipped to Penang
Yes.
with other children.
Yes. So he and 7 other 10-year-old, 7-year-old kids were shipped to Penang because Penang was where, opportunities for education and later on, economic opportunities existed. Yeah. So so you could say the Indian Muslim punya migratory route lah. That was one of it lah.
And this would have been maybe about the 1940s?
This was, yeah. So basically he left the British Raj, British India in 1947, and then he arrived in British Malaya.
MashaAllah.
Yeah. So
Leaving your grandparents behind
yes,
and all that?
Yes. Then my mother, on the other hand, she grew up in Batu Pahat.
Okay.
And she too has a very interesting background because her great grandfather fled, these very harsh policies of the Dutch, to Batu Pahat because Batu Pahat was where the rubber boom was happening in Malaya at that time.
I see.
So they drained the swamplands. That's why you have a lot of parades in Batu Pahat, right? Parit
Okay.
Raja, Parit Bengkok, and so on. Yeah. So they developed, smallholder rubber industries, and from there, through education, my grandfather became a headmaster, and then my mother later on became a teacher, and ended up in meeting my father in New Zealand.
Really?
Yeah. So
And of course, Tan Sri Professor Sahul Hamid, as he was relating his story about his poverty, being involved in local gangsterism, the challenges that he went through being in ITM, being kicked out of ITM, having to deal with the anger that he was experiencing at that age of his life. All of it is inspiring to us. And again, even so inspiring, it became a movie about his life and how he changed and went through the different courses of his life to become who he is today. So inspiring as a leader.
Sejak lahir lah kata, saya dalam kesusahan. Kan, nak kata masa muda pun, masa baby pun, saya hampir mati sebab demam panas. Itu pun berlaku. Dan masa berumur, saya tak ingat, tapi umur 5-6 saya boleh ingat. Masa 1, 2, 3, 5, 6 saya teringat pada nenek saya. Nenek saya mula bela saya lah, kira daripada kecil kan. Mak saya ada, tapi kami daripada keluarga miskin. Dan bapak saya pula kerja di Kelantan dan jarang balik. Tak ada sekali balik macam tu lah. Tapi adik-adik saya ramai. Kan? Dan saya dah anak sulung. Bila anak sulung, kadang-kadang adik saya lapar, saya tahu. Umur 6 saya dah mula pergi minta sedekah. Saya akan pergi dekat kedai-kedai, minta lah kan. Dia akan bagi. Sebab balik, I share dengan adik-adik. Kan? Kadang-kadang makanan tertinggal, ada juga ayam tertinggal. I pernah ambil bawa balik, share dengan adik-adik saya. Hidup saya macam tu. Nak pergi sekolah, pakaian pun tak berapa. Orang kata apa? Tak ada lah nak kata pakaian kasut air koyak.
The second leadership trait I'd like us to focus on is creating the new and the different. What does that mean? Often enough, we are challenged in life. We are challenged by norms that inhibit us from achieving what we want to achieve. So how do we as a leader think about creating something which may be different, a departure from the norm? In layman terms, we often call this being street smart. And each and every one of our guests that we interviewed has this trait where they manage to maneuver themselves out of a situation, especially when it is troubling for them or they are dealing with a major hurdle in their life. Our Mr. Startup, Azwan Osman Rani. If you observe carefully, when he related the story of because of his physical small size, he then had to create games with his friends that would enable him to still participate in games. They may not have been the most fun games or the most popular games. He talked about field hockey. But again, it was for someone to be able to come out of a situation of disadvantage, to use it to his advantage, even leading to him one day even taking up the sport of competitive frisbee while in uni. And if you can imagine, his life as a startup person also stemmed from many challenging situations where he needed to change, where he needed to create something that's new and even challenge the giants who were conquering the industry.
So I ended up learning very early on how to make my own games, how to convince the younger kids to join me in my crazy pursuit of games, right?
And this is just like playing as a child.
You know, at the playground, right? At the
Okay.
taman.
Okay. And where was home? I mean, for you in those days.
So 7 years old, we moved to Taman Tun.
All right.
So Pasiaran Sabah, grew
Okay.
up there all the way until Form 5.
Ah.
Those were my formative years. But,
Okay.
you know, you kind of learn how you adapt, how do you kind of create new games
Mhm.
when you don't fit into the conventional mold of your peers.
And you're the eldest,
I am the eldest.
and you have a brother.
I have a younger brother and a younger
and
sister.
a younger sister.
Yeah.
So were they physically small built?
No, my brother is much bigger than
Much
me.
bigger.
Yes, yeah.
And your parents?
Yeah, very modest.
Okay.
You know, physically, both were
Oh.
academics, university lecturers.
Okay.
So very much about books at home.
Datuk Rizza Abduh is another type of leader that we know had to deal with a lot of uncertainty, but he used his own ways to overcome dealing with trouble by creating new and different. A classic example which he shared was when he was with JKR and he talked about all this project Terbengkalai. Now, any other person would say, it's out of my reach, it's out of my hands, I've got no power to do anything about it. But yet, with tenacity, with humbleness, very gracefully, he researched and he found out what are root causes causing all these projects to be stranded. And he took it upon himself to learn, to be prepared, and to eventually voice out and make those changes, imagine, which eventually became change of policy in JKR for someone who was still in his early 30s.
So the funny thing was, macam schools project, I was in charge. And the school was built quite fast. When we award the project, quite fast. Bila sampai ke Bumbung, they stop. Sampai ke Bumbung, they stop. You know, and the contractor is nowhere to be seen. Lari. And then we look for the contractor, then they never come and things like that. So this problem was quite rampant. The reason is because the Bumi Putra contractor got it and they sub it to the Chinese contractor. And when the Chinese contractor sort of took the job, and then when they finished with the money, then I think they just leave the job.
Hadith Iskandar also, he had to deal with a lot of challenges. He had to create the new and the different. Remember his story when he realized just how professional stand-up comedy can be. But he didn't just rest on his laurels. He realized that he had to go back to basics. If he's willing to create the new and the different, you need to learn from the masters. You need to know what works and what doesn't work. And most importantly, you need to be diligent as well as persevere in making those changes happen. And inshallah, over time, we can see just how well he has performed and become amongst the world's best stand-up comedy professionals.
And then stand-up comedy started in technically 1990. I was just doing it for fun.
Yes.
I've told the story many times. It was just a friend of mine who remembered me as a joker. Her name is Marina Mustafa. Thank you, Marina. Cajoled me and said, Harith, can you go on stage at the lobby lounge of the old Subang Airport Hotel? Tell your funny stories. And what funny stories? I used to make her laugh. She was my college, university friend. She said, oh, you got the story about this, and the story about this, and the story about this, and the story about this. You just tantum all together, and you tell stories. So I did that, and people laughed. Then I went to All That Jazz, which is a jazz comedy bar run by Michael Veerapan back in the day, in SS2.
Wow.
Rafiq Rashid was performing. He's a musician who would change lyrics to songs. During his break, someone said to him, hey, this kid tells funny stories. So he called me up. I told my funny stories. Someone saw me and was like, hey, I've got this event, function, dinner. I give you $200. Come and tell your funny stories. Okay. Someone saw me at that show. Hey, I've got this thing. Give you $200. Okay. And then, after 2.5 years, I kept getting different shows. And sooner or later, I was earning more doing this part-time job than I was working in Leo Burnett, because I was still working in Leo Burnett at the time.
I can imagine.
And, the amount fluctuated until 2.5, 3 years. I wasn't taking it seriously. I was just, shot lah. It's like playing football after work kind of thing. Something I did at night. Until one day, a good friend of mine, Andrew Lessie from the Instant Cafe Theatre, said, hey, Harith, every time you perform at these functions, how much is the agent giving you? In those days, there was no social media.
Okay.
If you had a company function, you had a show, you got hold of an agent. An agent would get you the sound machine, the light machine, the MC, the dancers, the modeling, the musician, the band, and the comedian, whatever. I was the only comedian. And then the client would pay the agent, and then the agent just pay us what they would say that they were worth. And I was telling Andrew, sometimes 200, sometimes 300, sometimes 400, 500. Oh, well, because I was just doing 30 minutes. And Andrew was like, bro, are you mental? Because he's British. So, are you mental, mate? The client is paying the agent 2,000 to 2,500 for you. And I was like, is the client mental? Why is the client paying that much? I'm just on stage telling funny stories. And he mapped it out for me. He said, bro.
Tan Sri Professor Dr. Sahul Hamid is a classic example of someone who had to deal with trouble innovatively, create a new life for himself, and he realized that he can only do this by reflecting on his situation. So from his stories, if you can recall very, very clearly, he related his story about how he met this person on the train who made him realize that for 4 reasons he needs to change, or if not be better. And from that point onwards, having been kicked out of ITM, he realized that if he doesn't change, nothing's going to change for him. So he recreated himself, he did away with the anger, and from then onwards, he became an outstanding student and eventually in life a successful professional.
I was kicked out of UiTM. I kerja kontrak, patutlah yang ada peristiwa yang berlaku yang ubah hidup saya tau. Peristiwa tu masa tu bukan dekan, head of department, bagi tahu saya, you have to leave UiTM, pack your bags and go. You failed. You cannot register. So I nak balik daripada KL naik kereta api Sinaran Express orang panggil. Sinaran Express 12 jam tu.
Express.
Masa perjalanan tu seorang pakcik main duduk sebelah saya. Dia ingat lagi pakai songkok hitam, baju Melayu hitam, kain pelekat. Kan dia pakai slipper ya. Ingat lagi dia pakai slipper. Dia nampak saya, dia tanya lah kan, why are you crying? Dia tanya dalam bahasa Melayu lah, kenapa nak nangis ni? So saya cerita lah, I told him saya nak belajar jadi engineer, tapi tak ada harapan dah. Saya dibuang. Lepas tu dia tanya, awak nak jadi engineer? Betul. Saya kata, ya pakcik. Kan, kalau saya boleh belajar semula, saya akan belajar. Kan, lepas tu pakcik tu tanya, saya nak tanya soalan kepada you, dia kata. first question dia ask, awak percaya kepada Allah tak? Saya kata saya percaya, pakcik. Memang saya orang Islam. Soalan kedua, awak solat tak? Saya cakap betul lah, kadang-kadang tak, pakcik. Jarang, pakcik. Saya pernah cakap jarang. Dia kata itu adalah satu kesilapan. Awak mesti tak boleh tinggal solat. You have to pray. And then dia ada sebut juga tambahan tentang solat tahajud. Dia tambah later on. I tak pernah tulis dalam buku tu. Dia suruh I belajar lepas semain tahajud. And then the third question, awak sayang ibu tak? Oh, saya sangat sayang pada ibu. Dia kata ramai zaman masa itulah tak hormat ibu. Dan dia ceritalah kita kena sayang pada ibu supaya ibu akan doa. Doa itulah akan selamatkan dia. Yang soalan keempat dia tanya, awak suka ke tolong budak-budak miskin? Saya kata saya miskin, pakcik. Tolong saya, pakcik. InsyaAllah saya percaya saya akan tolong. So 4 peristiwa ni ubah nasib saya.
From a very young age, Dr. Shahridan Faiz, knowingly or unknowingly, was always self-aware about the environment and people around him. Yes, today he is a social development person. But in spite of all that, he was always constantly looking for creating new ways of improving people's livelihood. From his younger days in Penang to his life working with the World Bank, traveling all over Africa, and eventually now even back in Malaysia, he continues to look at innovative ways of creating new programs, new initiatives, creating more awareness so that things change for the better. Again, these are a specific leadership trait of successful leaders that all of us should learn from.
So there were many issues that were beginning to emerge because of the rapid industrialization the country was going through. So I became sort of activated by that, you know. And in I started an organization called Persatuan Kesedaran Sosial you know, or SEDA, yeah. And the few years I was actively involved, you know, we organized activities, events to raise awareness, you know, about environmental and conservation issues. Yeah.
Really?
But what started as you know, an interest on how to protect, you know, the flora and fauna of, of our nation, very quickly I began to realize that, you know, it was not simply the need to protect. You need to deal with the social environment too, because that's where the sources of you know, the threats were coming from. So one has to now to look at, you know, why do human beings behave in a certain way, you know? Why do we formulate certain policies that impact upon, you know, the environment and impact upon people's livelihoods? And that's how I moved from from geology to environment to social.
MashaAllah, interesting. The third leadership trait that we're going to examine on this particular special episode is about caring about others. In simple words, empathy. Not just thinking about yourself, but also being aware that there are people around you that will help you succeed, as well as doing your duty to ensure that everyone is well cared for. This is a very important trait of successful leaders, all the more those with the DNA of nation building. Datuk Reza Abdul, obviously someone who has dealt with large teams over the years. There are many examples in his stories. One particular example, which reflects on me a lot, was how he related the story about helping his laborers have proper housing while he was on duty in Penang. Even coach asked him the question, what about your other team members? Will they feel not slighted by you going all the way down to your labor? He even said it's okay because he knows that they are occupied with their own responsibilities. Let me take care of those who need help at the very ground.
And I was involved in looking after my laborers. A lot of them don't have they don't have houses. But we have maybe like 50 units of our quarters being occupied by those pensioners when they refuse to leave the house. So here I have 50 units of houses, and I have many of my laborers don't have houses.
I see.
So I use that issue to help and bring out those people who are pensioners and bring the laborers into the because their salary was only about 300 to 400, and actually without the overtime they cannot survive. They cannot survive. So they need to be given overtimes, and that will get them to the level of about 700 to 800 a month.
Okay.
And if they live in the government quarters, they only pay about 10 ringgit.
Oh,
So
10 ringgit.
10
Oh,
ringgit.
wow.
So I think that is a big relief for their. So
I can imagine.
I spend a lot of time helping the laborers,
Okay.
but in the process I learned a lot about
Okay.
the
So, in spite of his consistent desire to create, to work on startups, Azran Osman Rani, he doesn't forget his responsibility to develop his next line of leaders. This is an example of a leader who has empathy, not just to think about himself, but also realize that there has to be continuity, there has to be development. So he talked about the different companies that he helped start up, not just about starting up the company, but also helping to build the next level of leaders who eventually one day will succeed him.
And very quickly, Jeremy and I decided once we could raise capital. Okay, well, for this to really grow, we've got to have a very strong team, right? And it is finding people like Aiden and Tiffany and Ahmad and Kenneth, right? And really helping to nurture them and make them uncomfortable in leadership roles and taking on assignments that really stretch them. Once you know that, hey, you know what, they can actually lead and they can probably likely do a much better job than you, then it's time to pass the reins to them, right?
As you can see, Tan Sri Professor Sahul Hamid is someone who is indebted to the people who have helped him all throughout his life. He related the story, obviously, of his late mother and his partner, but not forgetting, he even recalls with great compassion about Miss Tan. Miss Tan, who helped him in his most dire situation, where he was about to give up on life and his education. And this is something that translated to him in later years, constantly being aware of the need to care for others. Yayasan Prihatin, for example, is one of the many initiatives that he has taken upon himself to implement successfully as a leader, so that he can give back to society, someone as a leader who constantly shows empathy and care towards others.
Yayasan Prihatin adalah unit banyak volunteers yang percaya budak-budak miskin, dan kita bagi masuk ITM ataupun universiti-universiti lain. Sekarang access ke universiti lain. Sebab asal dia nak belajar, kita bagi. So Yayasan is a very big organisation now. Tapi kami funding kami cari sendiri lah.
Okay.
Like contohnya we do a lot of crowdfunding, ataupun kami organize concert. David Foster tu kami buat.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yang Aina Abdul.
Oh, so this is a huge fundraising
Yeah,
activity. Maybe what we could do is that, if you don't mind, we will also portray the Yayasan punya details on our screen, and by all means, if our viewers and listeners are willing to please contribute towards the foundation.
Yayasan Prihatin, we have a proper audit system.
Harith Iskandar, as successful as he has been and has become, he's not afraid of others who are up and coming. In fact, in showing his empathy, you can see how he has become a mentor to current day professionals who one day hopefully will be as successful as he is. He talked about the story of Douglas Lim, right, who was just buskering, and yet Harith, just like with many other up and coming professionals, took him under his wing to help them develop their craft as a stand-up comedy professional.
that even in doing something wrong or not as good as, there's actually a lesson in there, and that lesson may have been equally, if not more powerful than not doing something wrong. So I wouldn't say there's nothing I regret. If anything, I would have been more hardworking, lah, so to speak, in terms of, because when I started, I was the only one for many years.
Yeah.
Stand-up comedy is not a cultural thing in Malaysia. There were duos, A.R. Badul and his partner, and it was all sketch comedy.
Yeah.
So I was alone for a long time. There was Instant Cafe Theatre doing sketch comedy. So because I was alone, I was just cutting my own path, but there was no competition until much later on, 2005 onwards, when competition came along. And then I was like, oh, wow, Douglas Lim was someone that I first mentored.
You mentored him, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So Douglas Lim was a singer-songwriter, busker.
Yep.
He went to the, what's the Malaysian music was? MMA? Malaysian music, what Malaysian music was.
Yeah.
And he was part of the Young Pepsi talent, busking and all. And he said he's lugging his guitar and his amplifier. And then he sees Hari Iskandar come, not carrying anything, grab the mic, go on stage, do comedy, walk up, and he's like, hey, I want to do that. I don't have to carry my guitar and my amplifier.
So he was actually a busker before he became
a musician,
a
singer-songwriter. So he came up to me and said, and I let him open up for me a couple of times somewhere.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so, and that was then I began to realize, oh, so now there is young pups snapping at my heels. That's when I would say
step up.
Competition is always good.
Yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
You cannot be number one unless there is a competent number two.
Can?
Why be number one when there's nobody else?
Yeah.
How good are you?
Yeah.
So people are like, hey, Harith, all these young people are going to... I'm like, bring it on. It can only spur you. Never, if you have a makan place, a Mexican makan place and another Mexican makan, instead of trying to beat your opponent, use it as inspiration, collaborate, grow bigger. And this is true of anything.
And finally, Dr. Shahidan Faiz, again, going back to just how he cares for the environment and community around him, constantly, time and time again, cares for people, shows great empathy. He is someone who is so well learned, who is so successful in his career, yet because of his care about the community and environment around him, just like his experience he shared on the PPR project, again shows us a leader who constantly is caring and shows empathy, and it's a strong trait for a successful leader.
And this happened maybe about 5 years ago. I did a small piece of work for the World Bank. We were looking at the issue of urban poverty in Malaysia. And we found that, if you want to find the urban poor in Malaysia, most of them can be found in our public housing projects, our PPRs,
PPR,
Project Perumahan Rakyat. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And here's the interesting story, we mentioned earlier about how rapidly Malaysia has urbanized, And when you look at other countries, when you have such a rapid urbanization going on, it very often comes with rapid development of slums. Because people from the outside regions, from the rural areas, they start coming into the city, right? And they exert a pressure on the city, in terms of housing, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. And you can see that in many cities around our region, But if you travel around Kuala Lumpur or Penang or Johor Bahru, you don't see that many slums. Or you don't see slums at all. And that's because Malaysia has been very successful in housing the urban poor. So we've actually done very well in terms of housing our urban poor. A lot of people don't realize, but in the 1970s, about 70% of Kuala Lumpur was covered by setinggan.
So, in summary, through this special episode and reflection of our 5 guests previously, there are 3 leadership traits and capabilities that Coach rasa paling penting untuk kita amalkan dan menghayati. Okay. The first one as a leader, again, is how do we inspire others? How do we, through our storytelling, get people to see what we want them to see? The second leadership trait is dealing with uncertainty, dealing with trouble. How do we go about being smart in creating the new and different as a leader? And hopefully this will be something that will create new paths of opportunities, not just for us, but for the people that we lead. And the third leadership trait we focused on today was empathy, caring about others. Bagaimana kita bersimpati, bagaimana kita memberi peluang untuk mereka-mereka yang kurang bernasib baik untuk menghayati dan dapat berjaya seperti mana yang kita nak. So I hope that all of you, in reflecting on this special episode today, will also share with us the same sentiments. Please do take time, if you haven't had a chance to watch all the videos, please watch the episodes that you may have missed. There's a lot of learnings that we can have. And hopefully through future episodes, we will continue to bring and inspire you with these special guests that hopefully will resonate with you, and hopefully there'll be more to come. Thank you again for joining us on this episode of Cuba Cerita. Till we see you again, Assalamualaikum, Salam Sejahtera, and have a good week ahead.